Today's daf is daf Yud Ches. We're going to start on the bottom of Tezayin over Beis, just a few lines up from the bottom. Tanya Beit Shammai Omrim Sholosh Kitos Hein Liyom Adin. We can divide up the people into three groups, three levels, as far as Tchias HaMesim is concerned, when there'll be the final judgment. Achas Shel Tzadikim Gemurim, that have Zechuyos, V'achas Shel Rishonim Gemurim, they're avonos, v'achas shel beinanim, they're mechzal mechza right in the middle. Tzadikim gmurim nichtomim v'nechtomim li'alter l'chaye olam. And Tosfos points out this is referring to a more of a spiritual nature, and in terms of olam haba, rishonim gmurim nichtomim li'alter l'gehenom. So that's again for the future. Shenema v'rabim yishene admas ofer yakitzu ela l'chaye olam v'ela lecharofos lidiron olam. So at the time of Tchias HaMesim, when there'll be lots of Yeshenei Ofer that will be woken up, and they'll stand for Tchias HaMesim, there'll be those who are judged for Chai Olam, for the eternal life, and those are the Tzadikim. There'll be those who will be judged for Cherpa and Bizayon, and those are the Rishonim. And what's going to be the status and the judgment of the Beinin? So here's the unique sheet of Beit Shammai. Yordim L'Gehenna, there's going to be a certain time period in which the Beinanim have to go through Gehenna, and that's going to be a sort of a cathartic cleansing process. Now we start to daf on Yud Zayin and Aleph with Tzaftzifin. Tzaftzifin means Tzoakim Ubochim. You'll see the first two words in Rashi on the daf, and Rashi et mitoch hayisurim. So from the suffering of Gehenna, for that certain limited period of time, they will be crying out. But then, after, here's the good news. Olim, they go up from Gehenna after a certain period of time, and they enter into Chai Olam Haba. They join the Tzadikim. Shenemar, Pasuk in Zechariah, V'havesi es hashlishis ba'esh. And the shlishis here is a reference to a third group, meaning the middle group of Beinanim. And God says, on the one hand, I'm going to bring them into the fire of Gehenna, but then, utzraftim kitzrof es hakesef. They will be cleansed like you take metal, kesef, for example, and you put it through a hot furnace, and then you remove the impurities and you purify it. B'chantim kivchon es hazahav. And I will purify it just like you purify gold. And when he will call out in my name, I will respond and hearken to his call. So Beit Shammai derived from this that the Shlishis, which is that middle group of the Beinanim, who are equal, shkulim, in terms of avonos and zchuyos. At the time close to Tchias HaMesim, God will bring them into the Eish of Gehenna to purify them, and they will be experiencing that cathartic experience of the Eish of Gehenna. And then afterwards, God has prepared them ready to enter in. They've achieved that level of Olam Haba. And at the beginning, they're going to be mitzaftzifin, they're going to be crying, but it's all for the ultimate benefit, the Aliyah. And regarding these different groups of Jews that Beit Shammai had already divided up the Jews into three categories, Chana said in her tefillah, in Shmuel Aleph Perek Beis, Hashem me'mis u'mechayeh morid sha'ol vayah. These are three groups. Me'mis is a reference to the Rishonim, mechayeh to the Tzadikim, and morid sha'ol, taking him down to Sha'ol, and then vayol, and bring them up. That's a reference to the Beinanim, because at the time of Tchias HaMesim, he will take the Beinanim down into Sha'ol, they will suffer, and then immediately he will take them up into Olam Haba. Beis Hill disagree. Omrim, their opinion is the Beinanim don't go to get him at all. Rather, Kosh Baruch Hu is knowing him b'midas harachamim. And this Beis Hill derives from the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim in Parshas Ki Tisa, following the Chet HaEgel. One of those 13 is called V'rav Chesed, and God is great in His compassion. And what does that mean? Mata klape Chesed. Man is placed, so to speak, on scales when his avonos are weighed and his chuyos are weighed in the judgment on high. And God, when it's a case where the two sides of the scale are equal and they balance each other out perfectly, that's the betative, then God is mata. He inclines the scale based on chesed towards the zchuyos, as if they had more zchuyos than avonos, and therefore they don't go down together. The aleim, and regarding these betanim, Omar David prays, he dedicates an entire parak, a chapter in Tehillim Kuf Tes Zayin, Ahavti ki yishma Hashem es koli. And the pasuk goes on to say, Afafuni chevli maves, umitzarei sha'ol mitzauni. In other words, they're very close to Sha'ol, very close to going into Gehenna. But they will not go into Gehenna because Hashem is mata klapi chesed. This particular chapter of Psalms was recited by David HaMelech after they anointed him as king over Israel, and he had a certain respite from the redifa of Shaul. And at that point, he had an Esorus, he was very uplifted, and he wanted to reach to God. He had a taiva to reach to God, who gave him such chesed and saved him from Misa. Aleim, regarding these Beinanim, Omar David, Kol HaParsha Kula, the entire parsha, Dalosi, V'Lio Shua, that even though these Beinanim have to be described and classified as Dalim, Dalosi Dalim, the mitzvahs, they're very thinned out in mitzvahs, they really don't have enough mitzvahs to really be Machriyas HaKaf in their favor. But nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them a Yeshua, he's Matas HaKaf Klape Chesed, and therefore David HaMelech recites Shuvi Nafshi L'Muchaychi Es Halech L'Fnei Hashem B'Yatzos HaChayim, that through this Mata Klape Chesed, the Beinanim are Zochim L'Chaye Olam Haba. The Brisa continues, Poche Yisrael B'Gufam, and we'll have a whole discussion about what that means. Upoche Umatz HaOlam B'Gufam, Yardim L'Gehenna. These are on a very low level. And even according to Beis Hillel, they will have to go to Gehenna. V'nitonim bot shnei masar chodesh. It's not just a short period of time. It's a full year of suffering, of 12 months. And li'achar shnei masar chodesh gufan kol. At the termination of these 12 months, their bodies come to a termination. They will be totally disintegrated, and they will not stand for Tchiyas HaMesim. And Ishmasam, and what's going to happen with their souls, Nisrefes. It will be burned. It doesn't mean literally, because you can't burn a neshama, but the Mefarshim explain, the Ramban in his very famous work called Torah Sa'adam writes that Tisbatel Yitzirasa, the entire creation of the neshama of these people of Poshis of Gufam will be button. Davar Nisra. Just like you burn a physical object, carbon, and hopefully off aether, it comes ashes. That's what's going to be the ultimate of that creation, which is called the neshama. However, Ruach Hashem, the Ruach of what's called Pius V'Ratzon, which God still wants to be appeased, and he has a will to make it easier for the Rishonim and be light with them. Mefazratam, he will take the remnants of their neshama and spread them tachas kapos raglei tzadikim. Yet it won't be an active kind of an onech, it'll be a different kind of suffering. And according to some Mefarshim, it means they will be in close proximity to the tzadikim. They will actually observe the great Noam, the Oneg, the Tainug, the infinite spiritual pleasure, the reward for the tzaddikim, and they don't have any part of it. So that itself brings them to a state of suffering. Shenemar, and now we're fast forwarding to the end of Tanakh in Malachi, where Malachi addresses the schar for tzaddikim and the onish for the shoyim on the day of judgment, loss of lavo, and he says about the tzaddikim, Ve'asosem rishoim. Asosem means miloshem miuch udrisa, to trample. You will trample on the rishoim. You efer tachas kapos raglechem. They will be like the ashes under your feet, which means, as we said before, their neshamas are sort of like disintegrated, spread out. They'll be under the kapos raglaim and the tzaddikim, and they will suffer by realizing and observing the great schar of the tzaddikim. I have here a note here based on the Chazdei David, Rabbi David Pardo, and he comments on this statement here in the Brisa of Gehenim Shnemasar Chodesh. Eina kavanah Gehenim shenidonim o achar misa. This is not the Gehenim after death. That's a different story. The Gemara is not even addressing it. But rather, this is a fast forward to the time of Tchiyas HaMesim. And once again, for a second round, they're going to go down to Gehenim, where they'll be judged and suffering for 12 months. Aval HaMinim, now the Brisa adds another category of people, a long list, enumerated list of categories of sinners who are not going to stand up at the time and participate in Tchiyas HaMesim, but in this case, there's no ruach. There's not going to be any appeasement. It's going to be ein kitzvah l'Yisrael. It's absolutely ultimate, non-stop suffering. Aval haminim, the minim Rashi identifies as stukim and by tusim, because they took the Torah. They only accepted the Torah Shpatzav, but even the Torah, they perverted. And Hamisoros, these are people who are snitchers, they're Malshinim, and they're Mosrim Mammon Yisrael. They are Mosrim that give over the property of Israel to the Goyim, to the powers to be. They are working against the Jewish people, and as a result of their Masira, the property of the Jews are confiscated by the government. The Apikarsim here, again, there are different interpretations, but we're going to go with Rashi. Rashi says these are Mevazei Talmidei Chacham. The Meiri writes that included under Apikarsim are the Kofrim B'Metzias Hashem. These are the atheists. V'Ovdei Avodah Zarah, these are the idol worshippers. And Hamakrish Nevuah, and those who reject the concept of prophecy. But the Gemara seems to identify them as those who are Mavazel Talmidei Chachamim, Lashmienu Sha'af Hu Bichlal Zeh. Even a person who denies one of the principles of the faith and so forth and so on, he is considered like a Mavazel Talmidei Chachamim. Shekafru b'Torah, they deny the divine origin of the Torah. Shekafru Tchiyas HaMesim, there are those who deny that there'll be a world to come, that we will rise and be resurrected. And then it says, Ushepershu midarkei tzibur. This might be a general comment on all the above, or it might be referring to those who separate themselves from Klal Yisrael completely. They don't do mitzvahs with Klal Yisrael. They don't suffer with Klal Yisrael. They don't contribute in any way to Klal Yisrael. They are separated entirely, following the ways of the Goyim. And then we have V'shenasnu chitasam b'eretz chayim. These are people who impose their fear on other human beings. And finally, we get to the last of this category, and that's those who cause others to sin. They cause the Rabbim to sin. Kigon, Yerovam ben Nevat, the Chaver, when he broke away from the Malchus Beis David of Yehuda, and he formed his own Malchus. He was so desperate to make sure that the Jews wouldn't go on Aliyah to Yerushalayim, because maybe they would be sucked in and influenced to join the traditional Judaism. So he put up idols in various places, and he prevented them from making Aliyah to Eretz Yisrael. He was a Rasha Shet Machti Esaram. In regard to all those that are listed in this list, Yarden L'Gehenim, they go to Gehenna, v'nidonim ba l'dorei doros. They will suffer in Gehenna for all eternity. Shenemar, Pasuk Yeshaya, v'yotzu v'ro b'figrei hanoshim aposhim bi. And it's possible that in our generation, we cannot influence others and inspire them by talking to them too much about Gehenna. I can tell you this, my Rebbe never mentioned Gehenna. And even in the Hasidic writings, it's only here, there, and elsewhere. But maybe the moralists, like in the school of what we call Chachmei Ashkenaz, maybe those Bali Musa would emphasize these kinds of Gemaras here about Gehenna. Anyway, the Gemara adds Gehenna kola vehein einam kola. In other words, even in the future, when they finish their period, a long period of time in Gehenna, they still are going to be punished forever and ever, even beyond Gehenna, even after Bittul Gehenna. Shenemar pasuk Tilim v'tzuram levalos sha'ol. In other words, tzurasam, which is a reference to their neshama, tivala will spend its time in sha'ol, so that even shu yizbala v'yichala hem yisharu v'lo yichlu onsha. Even when there'll be an end to Gehenna, they'll still be suffering their eternal punishment. Kol kach lama, ultimately they caused their sins, brought about the Churban Beis Hamikdash, which is called the Zvul, as the Gemara is going to derive. And the Aruch LaNer and others point out that even Hashanah said we don't have the Beis Hamikdash, but they're guilty of the kinds of sins that if the Mikdash were standing, they would bring about the destruction of the Mikdash. Nemar, in the pasuk that we saw earlier, B'tzuram levalos shaol mizvul lo. Mipnei ma teval tzurasam es hashaol shehu kola v'hemein kola mipnei azvul. So these last two words in the pasuk mizvul lo answer the question: why is it that even after the end of Shaol, nevertheless they will still be suffering and punished? The answer is mizvul lo. Ein zvul el beis hamikdash nemar. And this is, of course, in Melach Malpek Ches. It's always a perk we come back to speak about when Shlomo Melech dedicates the Beis Hamikdash. He says, "Bano banisi bayis beis zvul loch." I built a beis zvul. Now there was a note here about the meaning of the word zvul. Maybe we'll come back to that later. Do you have possibly a note? No? Okay. Yeah, the word zvul means based on English, but there's explanation for that. I don't want to hold this up. We have a vel to do today. Amra Chana, Aleim Amra Chana. On this group of Minim and Apikorsim and all the colleagues thereof, Amra Chana recited in a tefillah, Hashem Yechatu Meriva. Meriva for those who rise up against God. And Yechatu means Yishavru, he'll break them. And the reason for that is because they brought about the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. They do deserve to be destroyed. Amar Yisrael bar Avinu Pneihem, and the faces of these Rishon, these Minim, and so forth, Domim l'shulei hakdera, like the bottom, the outside bottom of a pot that's been burning on the fire. It turns black and it's all burnt up. And these Rishayim that are going to be judged for Gehenna, their faces from the fire of Gehenna will turn black. The Amar Rava, and Rava added the Inu, these Rishayim, Mishfire Shapire de Bnei Machoza, from the rich Me'unagim. Me'unagim are those who are enjoying the pleasures of life. They're very fat, so to speak, figuratively, in the city of Machoza, Makarion Bnei Gehenna. And after their death, we will call them Bnei Gehenna. So this is a very harsh criticism of the Rishayim in the city of Machoza, which was the hometown of Rav. Omar Mar. Let's go back to the Brisa of Basil. Basil Omrim v'Rav Chesed Mata Klape Chesed. So the Beinanim, according to Basil, would not be judged for Ganim at all. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Mata is Hakaf, based on Chesed, and he's Mizakin. And Vaksiv, the Gemara Esakasha, the Pasuk says, and this was the Pasuk that Beit Shammai I quoted earlier from Zechariah Novi, Lavesi es Hashlishis ba'esh. Beit Shammai derived from this conclusion that the Shlishis, which is the cat Beinadis, will be judged by the fire of Gehenna. So how could they still say that they will not be suffering the punishment of Gehenna? So Gemara answers Hasam, there the Pasuk, which refers to the Eish of Gehenna, and that's called Va'esh, that's a case of Poshe Yisrael Begufa. And even Basil would agree that in the case of Poshe Yisrael Begufa, they will have to go through Gehenna. Gemara asks the following question. Poshe Yisrael Begufa, Ba'amrit Leslu Takanta. With regard to Poshe Yisrael Begufa, we saw in the Brisa, and Basil accepts that even after the 12 months of Gehenna, when the goof is kala and the neshama is nisrefes, nevertheless, there's an ongoing punishment. In this pasuk, it says, "Va'vesias hashlishis ba'esh v'tziraftim kitzrofes hakes," and I will cathartically cleanse them. And he gives a mashal of the furnace that purges metal of its impurities. So this pasuk again, this is the Gemara's Kash on Basil. The pasuk by Vesi as Hashlichis Ba'H V'Tziraftim indicates that there will be a process of tziruf, and therefore the avonos will be cleansed, will be removed, and they have a takana. So how can you tell me we talk about Poshe Yisrael Begufa that don't have a takana? So the Gemara answers, Ki lesle takana. When we say that Poshe Yisrael Begufa have no takana, and their bodies will be completely destroyed, etc., that's berov avonos. That's because they have mostly avonos, and amongst the avonos, they have also the avon, the sin of Poshe Yisrael Begufa. Here that we said they have a takana, we're talking about Beinanim who have mechza avonos, mechza zchuyos, and that the itzvu nami avon to Poshe Yisrael Begufa, that amongst their avonos, they have this avon of Poshe Yisrael Begufa, but nevertheless, even so, after we calculate their zchuyos equal their avonos. Is therefore lo sagile de lav va'vesi es shlish peish. It's not enough that they have the sin of Poshe Yisrael Begufa, which again they may have a kapara for the ein dailo la'avon shel Poshe Yisrael Begufa she's kaper mibli sheyerdu legenu. So that certainly, if they have, in addition to being mechza beinanis, they also have on top Poshe Yisrael Begufa. So then there's no way out. There's no avoiding Gehenna. But it could be afterwards they'll be Olam. But if, on the other hand, they are Rov Havonos and they have Poshe Yisrael Begufa, then there's no salvation for the Lav. But what about a case of Mechza? of Beinanis. They don't have the Avon amongst their 50% Averis. They don't have Poshli Yisrael Begufan. There, Basil quotes the Pasuk of Chesed, one of the 13 meters of Rachman, Mate Klapi Chesed, and they don't go down to Gehenim at all. Basically, we have here three categories. We have the category of the Beinani, who is Mechzal Mechza, but he doesn't have the Avera Poshli Yisrael Begufan, and then we apply, Basil applies the principle of Rav Chesed, Mate Klapi Chesed. Then we go up one notch. We have Mechzal Mechza, but we also have amongst that Mechzal Monos, Poshe Yisrael Begufam, and they're going to go through that 12-month period of Gehenna, and then they will have a Takana. But when we get to Poshe Yisrael Begufam, that are Rov Avonos, so you have Tarti L'Reisa, A plus B for the negative, they will have no Tkuma, no Tikkun at all. Going back to the Brisa, with regard to the Beinanim, where Basil applies the principle of Mate Klapik Chesed Omar David Ahavti Ki Yishma Hashem Darash Rabba interprets this parak of Tehillim. Ma'idit Siv Ahavti Ki Yishma Hashem Es Koli Tachnunoi Omar Knesset Yisrael Fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ribbono Shel Olam Ema Sayani Ahuva Lefanecha. When am I beloved in your eyes? So it's interesting. We're reinterpreting the word ahavti as ahuva. It's Masechet shomea koli tachnuno, kol tachnuno. In other words, when you hearken to my prayers, my petitions, then I know that I am beloved in your eyes. Dalosi v'lioshia, afal pisha dalanim in a mitzvahs, even if I'm at the level of a Beinani and I'm very poor in mitzvahs, nevertheless, li noel loshia. And here, noel loshia is to be interpreted in the light of Basil's mate klape chesed. Okay, Poche Yisrael Begufa Mayni. What are the sins that are categorized as Poche Yisrael Begufa? And we said that if you add that to Rov Avonos, then it's kaput. If you add that to a Beinani, then he has to go through Gehenna. Amar Rav Karkafta Dilomanach Tfilin. Now here we have a machlokes. How to interpret this phrase Karkafta, which is a head, Dilomanach. According to one school of thought, it is referring to someone who never in his life wore tefillin, not even once. I mean, according to that pshat, we understand the mivtzat tefillin of Chabad, because even if I get you to wear tefillin once, I've taken you out of the category of Poshe Yisrael Begufa. However, Rabbeinu Tam interprets it that even if they did wear tefillin during their life, but now they're being mezalzel in the hanochas tefillin. They say, well, tefillin that's something disgusting. I don't want to wear it. Put things on my head and ritzuos and all that. So that's the interpretation of Lomanach Yisrael. Let's keep in mind that when we speak about tefillin, it's lav dafka tefillin. You could have a zilzul in other mitzvahs essay, sheba gufa. However, the Ben Yoda, Ben Ishchai says, Ikar ha'os, tefillin is a chosen v'simon shal avdus Lashem, v'ikar ha'osu b'tefillin shal Rosh. Those are exposed, and that's lo manach tefillin. The Brisa says, V'shenosnu chitisam the Eretz Chaim. They go down to Gehenna, and they'll be judged there and suffer the punishment for dorei doros, for endless generations. Rav Chizda, who is that referring to? That nasnu chitisa means their fear. They impose their fear on the living. Zeh pardos, that's a manig. Hamatil emo yisera, underline that word yisera ala tzibur. In other words, his domination over the tzibur is just frightening. You don't want to go near him. When you hear his name, you start shuddering. A manig, a parnat should be makil ema on the tzibur, but only within reason. This guy is interested in self-aggrandizement. Shalom L'Shem Shemayim. Rabbi Yehuda Marav called Parnos Amatel Evi Yisera Lat Tzibur Shalom L'Shem Shemayim Eino Roa Ben Talmid Chacham. Some interpret that as Midah Keneged Midah, that his son will not become a Parnos because he abused his position as a Parnos. Shenemar Osgin Eov Lachain Yerau Anoshim Lo Yireh Kol Chachmei Lev. In other words, since these people are afraid of this Parnos that, he puts in them the fear of God, therefore they won't be zochah to have banim or chachmei lev. We go back to the Bryce. How does God achieve this goal when there are the scales and they equal each other, they balance each other? How is God able to be, what method does God use to be mata kapi chesed? And here we have two opinions. Rabbi Lazar Omer, Kovsho, which means that he actually presses down on the scales, klape mata towards the bottom, the kaf, that side of the scale, which has the chuyos, and that's going to be machriyas hakaf. If I understand correctly, what Rabbi Lazar is arguing is that God will, in a sense, increase the zchuyos, so that now it's no longer 50-50, as more zchuyos than avonos. That's going to be machriya the avonos. Shenemar yoshev yirachamenu yichbosh avonoseinu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu will come back and have compassion by doing this kvichas kaf hazchuyos. And that's going to be machriya aravonos. There's a long discussion about Rashi. In any event, Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina Amar, he has an alternative understanding. No say, he lifts up one of the avonos, and since it's 50-50, the very moment he lifts up one of the avonos, that side of the scale, now there's hachras hakaf in favor of the zchuyos. Shenemar no say avon the overall pesha. So this concept of no say avon means that God will lift up one of the sins that are on that side of the scale. Ana debei Rabbi Yishmael, ma'avir rishon. According to this kind of debei Rabbi Yishmael, God will remove the first sin. And as a result, if there are mechzas chuyos, mechzavonos, then that mechzavonos includes that one sin which God is going to lift up and remove. And as a result, it'll be achras hazchuyos. V'cheni amidah, and this is the way that God behaves, meaning that God runs the world, anhaga, of what's called mata kapi chesed. Rava says, don't get too excited, because even though, according to Tanat Be'er, God will remove one sin, but avon atzmo in a nimcha, but that sin is not completely erased. It's not obliterated. And even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu removes that first sin from the scales, nevertheless, he doesn't erase it entirely. The Ika Ruba Avonos, Machshiv Behadayu. If the situation is such that even after God removes that one sin, there's still not enough zechuyos to weigh it down on the other side, it still remains mechzal mechzal, 50-50. That's even after he removes the avon, is then machshiv v'adayu. In such a case, God considers the avera as well. So the idea of removing one avon from the scales, according to Rav, is only when we have 50-50, and by removing that one avon, we can be machriyas hakaf l'kaf l'tzadz. Amar Rava, that should be the hearsay. Kol ma'avir al midosov. The word ma'avir is like you pass over something. Like we say, ein ma'avir al mitzvah, you're not allowed to pass over a mitzvah. Or ein ma'avir al ochlin. So it means that he, so to speak, passes over his midah. Let's say, for example, he has a midah of katz, of anger. He just passes over it. and he's not going to get focused on the situation that gets him angry. And not only that, he was meant to get angry at somebody else, at his friend, and instead of getting angry at him, he leaves his anger on the side. He's what's called Mavir al Midoso. And now we talk about Midah Kneged Midah, Mavir lo al Kol Pshah, that just like he was Mavir and he wasn't medagdek, he wasn't so meticulous and angry at his friend for whatever his friend did, God won't be angry and will pass over his sin, so he won't be punished for them. Shenemar, no say avon vi over al pesh. And we interpret this pasuk, but me no say avon. To who will God, atone for his sins and not punish him? Levi sha over al pesha. He's mavra al midosov kapi chavera sheposhek. Rav Huda braid Rav Yehuda, Rav Yeshua kola. She got weak. Oh, Rav Papa l'shiyuleve. Rav Papa came in to ask how he's doing, but Chazeh unfortunately saw him to cholish al that his world is coming to an end. Amar lahu, Rav Papa says to the Bnei Abayis of Rav Huna, Zvisule zvadto, which means prepare for him what we call in Hebrew Seder Laderech. He's going on a long journey. And the meaning here is an allusion to Tachrichim. He's a goner. Plus Sof Itpach. At the end, Rav Huna overcame his illness and he became healthy again. I mean, mitzvah for Rav Papa mitzvah. Rav Papa was embarrassed to show his face because it seems like by asking for Tachrichim, he signed his death sentence. Amrile, those who were there, I guess, said to Rav Huna, my chazis, what did you see after you were saved from death? Amalahu, he responded, Rav Huna responded, in Hapi Hav. In other words, Rav Papa was really right, says Rav Huna. I have to admit that there was Xera up in Shamayim from Misa. The Amalu HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but God came and intervened in the Bezin Shel Mala, and he banged on the table, so to speak. He said, Hov lo mukim lemilse. Lemile, in other words, he's Mavar al Midosov, is therefore lo tekuma ba'adayu, we should be Mavar al of, shenemar no se oven al peshel, mi yose oven lemisha over al peshel. L'sheris nachlosa. Omarav acha bar chanina, aliyah v'kotzpa. Aliyah means the part of the sheep that's muvchar, it's the best to taste, it's fatty meat, but it also has a coats in it. So you can't really enjoy it because it has this prickly piece of splinter in it. So in other words, Rabbi Acha is saying that even though there's some element of tanchumen here in this pasuk of Nosi Over Pesha, but nevertheless there's still a kotzpah. Why? Because it says here that over al pesha, l'she'eris nachlasa, only for the remnant of his nachal v'lo l'chol nachlaso. And we turn now to Daf Yud Zayin Beis, l'misha mesim atzmo kishirayim. God will lift the sin, overlook the sin of a person who fits the following profile. He's Mesim Atzmo Kishirayim. He considers himself as something that's insignificant. In other words, he's not Choshev B'nei Atzmo, he's not Mizgoeh, and he has the Midah of Anova. And again, if we had time, there's a long discussion in the Aruch LaNer, and he says that even Rabbi Acha Bar Chanina agrees to the first drasha that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is no say oven al mi sha'over al pesha, but he says there are two categories of people who are mavir and al midosa. One is a person who's mavir al midosa and he doesn't pay attention to insults because of govas alev. He's not impressed by someone who's shafel, who's inferior to him. It doesn't bother him ki uzeh. And then there's another category of someone who's Mavral Midosa, even though he is very sensitive, but he's Mavral Midosa because of his Anova, because of his humility. And on that last category, Rav Acha Bar Chanina says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Mochel Avon. Why? Because he is over al Pesha Machmas Anov as a result of Anov. Rav Huna, okay, just 1 second.